Twilight falls like a golden, translucent curtain over the vineyards. You're sitting by the window between Mainz and Koblenz, and the train follows the Rhine like an old friend it's visited 100 times before. The sun has left the sky, but the light it's left behind seems to be everywhere, diffuse, warming, glowing in a gold that almost turns orange, almost turns red, but not quite. The vineyard rows march up the slope like soldiers in an invisible formation, row after row, row after row, all at the same angle to the hillside, all the same distance apart. Each row is a line, and each line is filled with plants that have already shed their leaves, or are shedding them now. October is well advanced, and the harvest is long finished. What you see on the vineyards now is the rest that follows, the naked truth of the vines after they've given up their fruit. You lean your face closer to the window. The light is strange in this moment. It seems to glow through you rather than onto you. It's as if the whole world itself were becoming luminous matter, something that glows from within. The vineyards, the vines, the individual stakes driven into the earth to support the plants. Everything is full of this golden light. There are almost no shadows, only different shades of gold and orange. You watch how the light coming from above shines through the leaves still clinging to the vines. They're yellow, brown, red. Each color is a nuance of this twilight. Each color seems to glow from within. The vines aren't simply plants anymore in this light. They're almost living torches, almost works of art. You think about how people work up there, year after year, tending this slope, cutting these vines, gathering these grapes. And yet, in this moment, it looks as though no human hand has ever touched this earth. It looks like something nature itself has created, without help, without any purpose except its own growth. The river below is dark, almost invisible. The Rhine lies somewhere beneath these vineyards, but you can barely see it. Only here and there a glimmer of water where the evening light catches the surface. The train follows this invisible river, and your eyes follow the vineyards as they unfold again and again with each mile. Some are steep, almost vertical, and you wonder how people work there without falling. Others curve more gently, bending naturally to the slope. There's something timeless about this site. These vineyards might have looked exactly like this 100 years ago, 200 years ago. The vine is one of humanity's oldest crops, and here on the Rhine especially, it has deep roots going back centuries. Roman legionnaires perhaps once stood on similar hills and planted the first vines, establishing a tradition that's never truly been broken. And now, here you are, in the train, rolling through autumn, looking at these vineyards, thinking of that history, that long, long history of viticulture and harvest and patience. It connects you to something vast and ancient. The shapes of the vineyards are so characteristic of this region that they're almost like handwriting, like an artist's signature written across the land. Each slope has its own rhythm, its own personality. Some are perfectly arranged with mathematical precision. Some have small irregularities, where a stone is too large or a patch of earth too hard for planting. Some vineyards have been newly planted, their vines still tender. Some are ancient, their roots so deep they might touch stones that Rome once knew. And there's a story in all that. One you can't read from here, but you can sense it, feel it almost. You see only the physical manifestation of that story, the rows, the stakes, the vines, all together in this golden evening light, all speaking a language of labor. You notice the colors slowly losing their brightness. The gold grows darker. The orange grows darker. The whole sky becomes a purple that's almost violet. The leaves on the vines are no longer glowing from within. They suddenly look opaque, dark, as if someone had switched off the inner light that autumn had installed. It happens so quickly in this moment between twilight and night that you can barely keep up with it, barely see the change if you're not watching closely. The vineyards that seemed to glow just moments ago become silhouettes, outlines only, dark shapes against a sky that's still luminous. The rows are still visible, but only as shadow rows now, echoes of the light that's just vanished. It's like the fading of a memory, like the afterglow of a beautiful vision. You close your eyes for a moment to remember the colors better, and when you open them again, they've faded further still. That's the curse and the blessing of travel. Everything is fleeting. Everything disappears behind you, even as you're watching it. The train vibrates steadily beneath you, a steady pulse that begins to synchronize with your heartbeat. The other passengers have long since become inaudible. You barely hear a sound from them now. Perhaps the occasional rustle of a newspaper, the soft click of a cup lid. The light inside the carriage has come on, a faint yellow glow that dims your view outside, softens it, distorts it. You see your own reflection in the window now, half transparent, half real. And beyond that, the vineyards, also half transparent, also half real. It's as if you're living in two worlds at once, the world of the carriage and the world out there. And these two worlds blend together in the glass, in the light, in your tired eyes. It's a strange experience, seeing your own face overlaid with a landscape. Your reflection has no features anymore, only outlines, shadows. And beside it, through you, the vineyards. Also only shadows, also only outlines. It's as if you yourself were becoming part of this landscape, as if the boundary between observer and observed were dissolving. You're no longer outside, watching from a distance. You're inside, woven in, entangled with the vines and the earth and the time that's made them both. The twilight is now completely dark. The Rhine is invisible. The vineyards are only shapes, suggestions, barely more than dark sketches at the edge of your awareness. But your eye adapts, and slowly you begin to notice details again. Here and there, a light in a small cottage high on the slope, perhaps the home of a vintner or an innkeeper, a place where people warm themselves and drink and tell the day's stories. Some of these houses are old, probably as old as the vineyards themselves, their walls soaked with the smell of wine and time. Some are new, or at least newly renovated, whitewashed, modern-looking, with large windows facing down towards the Rhine. This mixture of old and new is typical of this region, your tired mind observes. Tradition and modernity coexist here, not always harmoniously, but still side by side. Like two languages spoken in the same city, neither quite disappearing, both somehow essential. The vineyards are the old, the original, unchanged across centuries. The new houses are an attempt to preserve that tradition while moving forward, to modernize it, to make it more profitable. But the vines don't care about such things. And yet, in this darkness, all of that is irrelevant. In this darkness, the vineyards are simply dark, and the lights simply lights, and you simply a traveler passing through, bearing witness. The colors are gone, but their memory remains. You can still imagine the gold, the orange, the red, the purple. These colors seem to glow directly in your eyes now, not from outside anymore, but from within. It's a strange experience seeing these images with your eyes closed. The train carries you onward, and the vineyards, they're still there, invisible, but there, in the great darkness of the autumn night. Your head grows heavy. The warmth of the carriage is comforting. The gentle vibration of the train is soothing. Your breathing grows deeper, slower. The darkness outside seems to flow in through your mind, seems to wrap around you like a warm cloth. The golden vineyards of the twilight become a dream you've already forgotten, though you could see them only moments ago. The Rhine flows somewhere beneath you, invisible, unheard, but there. And slowly, so slowly, even the last outlines of the vineyards blur into darkness, and you drift along with the train, with the river, with the night, your face still pressed against the window, your breath warm against the cold glass. And so we traveled on, the train and I, and the few other passengers sitting with me in the compartment or in the compartments nearby, each in our own small corner of the world, each on our own way into sleep. The warmth of the carriage, the soft ticking of the heating, the clacking of wheels on the rails, all of it became a single song, a song without words, a song that carries you along and soothes you and says, you can let go now. You can rest now. The train travels on for you. Time travels on for you. The world takes care of itself while you sleep. I met the bird watcher on the line from Nebel to Dagobah on one of those mild April evenings when the first true spring arrives and the air smells of the sea. She sat with a large pair of binoculars round her neck, had quiet eyes, and that concentrated composure of someone who spent their whole life observing. "They come back in May," she said right away. "The Terns. They're on their way now from Africa, flying over the Sahara, over countries I'll never see. But they know where they're going. They come to the salt marshes of Amram, the same every year, and I'm there counting them." She told of her work with a passion audible in every syllable. For 25 years, she's counted the terns when they returned from the south, from their winter quarters in Africa. Not from science alone, but from love. She knows the birds, or at least is quite certain she does. She knows which females return, which new partners have paired up, which young have grown and are ready to breed. "That sounds mad," she said with a kind smile. "But the terns are real characters. Each one has its own personality. Here," she said, showing me pictures and sketches in a worn notebook. "This is Frida. Frida comes every year since I first saw her 2 decades ago. She always nests on the same stone, the same nest. And this male here, the black one, I think is her husband. They've been together many years now, a real Tern couple." She described the bird's return like a great festival she gets to experience every year, a spring feast of nature. In April, it begins very quietly.
Individual birds appear, scouts, so to speak, who check whether everything's still in order at the breeding places. And then in May, when the sun stays longer in the sky and the nights grow short, they all come at once. Hundreds, thousands of terns, flying over each other, screeching and calling, wild with joy at being home again.
The intensity of that time is absolutely overwhelming, she said. You can feel the energy, the pure life force. The birds are wild, excited, joyful. They nest again. They begin their lives again after all those months of travel. And you as a human stand there observing and wondering and marveling. It's like a spiritual experience, a sacred time of nature. She told of difficult years when fewer birds returned than expected. Climate change, the slow rising of water levels, increasing ocean pollution, and overfishing. Last year, they arrived late, much later than normal. She'd never experienced that in all her years. The birds took longer for the journey. She saw that clearly. She'd been very worried. I thought maybe they're all gone. Maybe they'll never come back, she said. But they did come, she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. They're real survival artists, the best of all. They don't know that their world is changing, that the sea is warming, that fish are becoming fewer. They only know they have to go home, back to the salt marshes. That's a lesson I've learned. Nature is tougher than we think, but also more fragile, more vulnerable than we understand. She showed me her large list, notebooks thick, page after page of numbers and names and sketches and observations. Over 1,000 observations of individual birds over the years. I don't know them all personally, she said, laughing, but I know the places where they nest. I know the rhythms of their return. I know the seasons of the terns better than my own seasons. In May, when I'm on Amrum, on that flat island between endless sky and endless sea, I'm happiest, she said, her voice full of deep longing. I sit there at sunrise with my old binoculars and I count. I count every single tern that arrives, as if they were my children returning after a long absence. And as I count, as I see these birds come back from the warm south, I feel I'm part of something greater. I feel connected with the whole world. I feel part of the great migration, the great rhythms of nature, of life itself, the eternal circle. This work has taught me what it means to love, she said slowly. Patience and observation and deep attention. When you really observe nature, when you truly look, you understand that everything is connected. The bird in Africa and the bird on Amrum are connected. That's me, that's you, that's the whole world. We're all one in this great migration. She asked if I knew the terns. Small white birds with black wingtips and a black cap on their head, very elegant. They're masters of flying, she said, with wonder in her voice. They can fly over 100 kilometers per hour if they want. They can plunge like arrows into the water to catch fish. They're small, but they're warriors, real survival fighters. They fly across 2 continents to come to me. That's incredible. She spoke with quiet intensity about her own love for this work, how she never grows tired. She could have a normal life, she said, an office job in the city, a comfortable house, a car. But the terns pull her. That's her passion. They're my life. In May, when they return from their journeys, that's when I'm truly alive. The rest of the year I wait. I'm desperate for that time. She also told of difficult personal times, when she was alone and sad. But the terns always came back. They gave her reason to continue. They gave her structure and purpose. My life without the birds would have been empty, she said. But with them, with my task to count and to protect them, everything makes sense. She also spoke of what it feels like when the terns begin to breed on the salt marshes.
The pairs build small nests from grass and stones, hidden and vulnerable. Sometimes tragedies happen. Predators come, or the weather turns bad and stormy. But usually they succeed. The young grow up under the constant watchfulness and care of their parents. And then in July, when the new terns are ready for their great journey, I'm there counting them too, watching how they prepare for the long journey to Africa they'll soon have to make.
The train approached Dagobul, the important harbor from which you take a ship to the island of Amrum, my paradise.
"I can already see the sea," she said, leaning forward with undisguised impatience and anticipation. "Soon I'll be on Amrum. Soon I'll see the salt marshes again, the flat sandbanks, the sacred places where the terns breed and raise their young. Soon I'll count all those precious birds again. That's the best time of my life. That's why I live."
And the train rolls on, wheels rattling in the rhythm of nature and migration. And through the window, I already see the first gulls flying over the green flats, and I still hear the loud voices of the terns in my ears, and my eyes grow heavier and heavier with tiredness. And I dream of bird flights and salt wind and spring, and of the black caps of the terns, and everything grows light and peaceful and wonderfully warm. The train rolled gently on, and outside, the world had grown quite dark. Just a few lights in the distance, solitary windows where others too were settling into sleep. I thought about all the people in the world at that moment, each in their bed, their compartment, their room, and how we were all part of one great, quiet movement, a movement towards sleep. The rhythm of wheels on the rails, clack-clack, 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 was like the breathing of some large, friendly creature carrying us all together through the dark, through time. And as the train rolled on through the night, clack-clack, clack-clack, I noticed my thoughts growing slower, the images in my head growing softer, the edges becoming blurred. The voices I'd heard became a gentle humming, a humming like distant bees, or like an old song heard as a child and now only half remembered. The warm air in the carriage wrapped around me like a blanket, and I felt my shoulders slowly dropping, the day's tension falling away from me piece by piece, like leaves falling from a tree, without hurry, without sorrow. The train carries you south, from Konstanz to Radolfzell, and the orchards begin to appear slowly. First, one by one, then in clusters, then everywhere. It's autumn, it's October, and what the trees haven't yet dropped lies on the ground, rotting quietly, peacefully. You lean against the window and watch as the earth becomes scattered with red and yellow patches, as fruit that needed so much sun to ripen is simply left where it has fallen. The trees themselves are no longer green. The leaves still clinging to them are brown or yellow, or that dark reddish brown that only autumn knows, that only this moment of the year can bring about. The trees look almost naked, almost shameless in their undressing, their branches visible, their inner structure laid bare for anyone passing to see. But it's not an unpleasant nakedness. There's something deeply honest in it, something necessary and true, something that teaches you that concealment isn't everything, that careful exposure can be beautiful too. A tree in October is a tree that knows itself perfectly, that tolerates no more pretense or artifice, that simply is what it is, needing nothing more than light and water and time. The fallen apples are everywhere. They lie between the trees. They lie at the edge of the garden where the fence separates the wood from the orchard. Some are still red and firm, as though they'd only just left the branch and fallen at once. Others are brown, rotten, compressed by rain, or by the feet of those who could have gathered them, but didn't. There's a lesson in this sight, your tired mind thinks. A lesson about abundance and scarcity, about what is given and what isn't taken, about the waste that happens in nature, quite without human intention. The smell of must drifts into the train when the window is open. At least, so your memory insists it does. You can't actually smell it right now. The window is firmly closed. Your compartment is warm and completely sealed against the outside. But you know exactly how it smells. That rich scent of rotting apples, of fermentation, of sweetness gradually turning to sourness. You may have smelled it once before in childhood, or your grandmother told you stories of it, or you simply read about it in old books and your clever mind constructed the scent for you. It doesn't matter which. The smell is there anyway, invisible but utterly real. Another distinct layer to the landscape you construct with your closed eyes and your reaching memory. You watch a child running between the trees. It's quick, barely more than a movement, a brown figure against the brown and red of the orchards. The child bends, picks up an apple, throws it away. Then another, and another. The child seems to be playing some game, though you can't quite tell which one. Perhaps the child is simply interested in throwing the apples, watching them fly, watching them fall. Or perhaps the child is waiting for something, and throwing apples is just a way to pass the time until whatever it's waiting for arrives. Then the child is gone, vanished, and the orchard is silent again. It's as if the child never existed, except as a small interruption in the still scene, a small reminder that people have been here, that people live, that people work and gather and play. The orchards here are not wild, they're tended, if not perfectly so. There's order, but also decay. There's structure, but also freedom. October is the season when both can exist side by side without disturbing one another. The train takes a gentle curve, and suddenly you see a whole valley of orchards at once. Hundreds of trees, all in the same condition, all with their fallen fruit, all with their bare or half-bare branches. It's like an artist's view from above, a painting in browns and reds and grey-greens. It's beautiful, in a sad, concluding sort of way. It's the beauty of autumn, the beauty of harvest, the beauty of things that are ending. You imagine what it's like to work up here, day after day, every October. The gathering of apples, checking for quality and firmness, moving them to storage or to the heavy wooden presses for making cider. It's laborious, methodical, repetitive work. Your hands grow cold with early autumn chill. Your back aches from bending. Your patience is tested when apple after apple continues falling, more than you can ever possibly gather in a single day. And yet, there's something deeply satisfying in it too, you think. There's a clear task, a clear and necessary goal. You know exactly what you need to do, and you do it faithfully, year after year, autumn after autumn. There's real security in this kind of repetition, even if there's also undeniable monotony. A tree bearing 10 baskets of apples is easier to understand than one bearing only 5 or 15. There's order and predictability, if you only look for it. The structure of the orchards isn't random or haphazard. There are rows, regular spaces between the trees, sometimes small paths or tracks running between the rows. All of this was planned by people who knew intimately how apple trees grow, how they must be tended and pruned, how the sun and rain need to reach them best. It's a kind of partnership between human and nature, your tired mind thinks. A collaboration repeated century after century, fundamentally unchanged in its essentials, even as techniques improve. The leaves still clinging to the branches flutter slightly in the wind. Not a strong wind, just a breath, just a gentle breeze, but enough to move them, to remind them they're alive, even though they're already technically dead, even though they're ready to release and fall, even though most will stay on the branches for only a few more days before eventually gliding down. Some actually do fall while you're watching, spinning down through the air like tiny helicopters, like parachutists without parachutes, until they land on another apple, or soft earth, or in a bush, or in the tangle of other fallen leaves. The train is too fast for you to see all these small movements clearly, but your mind constructs them anyway, fills in the images it can't completely grasp, continues the story that nature is telling here. An old rusted bucket lies beneath one of the trees. You wonder how long it's been there, whether it's still used, or whether it was simply left, forgotten, a relic from an earlier October, from an earlier life. It's a small thing, but it fascinates you, these buckets, these tools of work left abandoned. They're proof of human activity, but also of human forgetting, of human carelessness. Or perhaps simply signs that the people who work here have other tools now, more modern containers, more efficient systems. The orchards grow scarcer as the train approaches Radolfzell. Soon they alternate with open fields, with dark woods, with built-up residential areas. The concentration of apple trees, the density of the harvest, all of it scatters into the ordinary landscape, becomes something less distinctive and special. It's a slow transition, a gradual disappearing of what held your attention. The orchards thin out, become fewer and more scattered, until only an occasional tree or two remains, weathered and solitary, until finally they're gone altogether, swallowed back into the general countryside. But you're genuinely surprised how much you've come to love these orchards, these ordered rows of trees with their fallen fruit, these visible symbols of labor and abundance and gentle seasonal decay. It's not the dramatic that appeals to you. It's the everyday, the repeated, the quiet and unhurried. It's the fact that these trees stand here faithfully, year after year, bearing their fruit in season, and people come and gather what they can, and it all begins again the following spring. It's the comforting feeling of continuity in a world that's constantly changing and shifting. Your eyelids grow heavy now, heavier with each passing mile. The warmth of the carriage and the sweet, sour memory of the cider smell blend together into something deeply sleep-inducing. The orchards become blurred red patches beyond your vision. The trees become simple brown lines and shadows. The apples that have fallen, the apples still waiting to fall, they all disappear gradually into the soft darkness of your closed eyes. The sweetness of the apples lingers on your tongue still, a fading memory, a lingering trace, while the train carries you steadily onward, and you slowly drift down into sleep, still seeing the orchards before you in your mind's eye, still hearing the work of the harvest happening, even though it's only the steady rhythm of the wheels beneath you. Out there lies the world after harvest. The stubble fields stretch endlessly, golden brown and short, as though someone had shaved the entire landscape with a dull blade. You sit by the window between Würzburg and Nuremberg, and the train carries you through this still, harvested world, like a picture from an older storybook, one perhaps you saw as a child at your grandmother's cottage. The sun hangs low, so low it throws the stubble into sharp, thin shadows. Each little bundle of straw casts its own shadow, and together, these thousands of shadows form an almost wave-like pattern across the field. The train vibrates quietly beneath you, the rhythm of wheels on rails becoming the heartbeat of the journey, steady, reliable. You watch as this pattern shifts with each passing second, how the shadows wander as the sun continues its course. There's something soothing in following this movement, one that isn't your own, that you can only see from here, from the warm window seat of the train. Then, after a while, your eyes notice them, the hay bales. They lie scattered across the field, not neatly arranged in rows like in your younger memories, but in groups, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs, as though someone had carelessly let them fall. They're large, compact, the golden straw densely pressed. Some are still pale, almost cream-colored, and you know these were only recently harvested. Others, farther away, have already taken on a grayer tone, as though they've already been through a few weeks of autumn weather. The first rain will make them darker. You lean your face closer to the window. The train takes a gentle curve, and suddenly you see several fields at once, all in the same harvested state, all with their hay bales, all golden brown under this autumn light. What a lot of work behind all this, you think, almost automatically. The cutting, the turning, the pressing, the bringing in. And yet, from a train window, you see none of it. Only the quiet result, the short stalks, the empty fields, the waiting bales. There's a moment when your breath touches the window and leaves a small, damp circle. You wipe it away, and your gaze continues across the landscape. A couple of birds, crows perhaps, or magpies, peck between the stubbles. They hop from one spot to another, and you wonder what they find there. Grains left over from the harvest, insects seeking shelter between the short stalks. The birds seem to know what they're doing. They look purposeful, concentrated. The carriage around you is warm and filled with the gentle sound of travel. Another passenger sits somewhere behind you. You hear the occasional rustle of a newspaper, but it doesn't really penetrate your awareness. The autumn sun falls in bright rays through the other windows, and these shafts of light cut sharply through the carriage air. There are dust particles dancing in these rays of light, tiny, slow movements. It's almost hypnotic, watching these particles. You imagine what it would smell like down there, in this stubble field landscape, if you could step into it. The dry scent of dried straw, with a hint of earth beneath it. Perhaps a little dust from the last passing of large machines across the fields. And yet, the fields are quiet now, still, empty of people and machines. They belong to autumn alone, and soon to winter, when rains make the earth softer and the first snowflakes fall here. A farmer might have a different view of these fields. He'd be calculating, thinking in harvest tons, in drying risks, in prices. But all that doesn't really interest you. What interests you is only that these fields are like painters' canvases on which autumn paints its pictures. The golden brown color, the dark shadows, the lighter bales, the occasional birds. That's enough. The longer you look out, the more details you become aware of. A small depression in the terrain where the field slopes slightly downward. A patch of woodland in the distance where the deciduous trees have already started to show their colors, reds and yellows standing out from the green beyond. A road, a single car driving parallel to the train, then speeding up and vanishing. An old grey wire fence dividing the fields from a meadow. The meadow beyond is still green, but it too seems tired, less alive than in summer. The train travels on, faster now it seems, and the fields disappear faster than they came. The next fields are similar, but not quite the same. Different heights, different arrangements of hay bales, a different rhythm. The train is like an eye that always watches further, that never lingers over one field, but always jumps to the next. You think almost involuntarily of the seasons, how they succeed each other like actors on a stage. Summer was hot and green and full of work, full of growth. Autumn brings the harvest, the rest, the preparation. And soon, very soon, winter will come, and these fields will be white, or grey under the rain, or hidden under a thin layer of snow. The train will travel then too, and there will be other landscapes, other stubble fields, other hay bales. But now, in this moment, it's these ones, golden and still. A thought comes to you. How many times have you looked out from train windows? How many landscapes have you seen this way, without entering them, without touching them? You're an observer, a silent witness to the German landscape, always in motion, always passing by. There's something melancholic in that, but also something comforting. You don't need to act, not to decide. You only watch. The stubble fields become more numerous as the train approaches Nuremberg. It seems as though the landscape has specialized here, as though this region lives on grain cultivation. Everywhere you look, these same short stalks, these same golden bales. There's a monotony in it, but a soothing monotony. No surprises, no variation. Just the quiet repetition of harvest, of order, of autumn light on stubble. Suddenly you notice there are hardly any people here, not even in the distance. No houses with smoking chimneys, no cars on the field paths, no farmers going about their work. Only the machines, long since gone, and the silence they left behind. It's a strange silence to perceive from a moving train. Your ear picks up the noise of the rails, the clacking of the wheels, the dull rumble of the engine. And yet, everything out there seems completely still, completely peaceful. The birds peck in the field, but you don't hear their song. It's only a guess, a memory that birds sing. You only see them, silent, as in a film without sound. The air in the carriage has grown worn. Your window has become slightly misty from your breath, and you now see the fields through a thin layer of moisture. It gives everything a kind of dream quality, a soft focus. You could wipe the window, see more clearly, but somehow you like it this way. These slightly blurred boundaries between you and the world out there. It feels like a borderline between two realities. On this side, warmth, safety, the gentle clacking of the rails. On the other side, cold air, damp and autumnal. The stubbles, the hay bales, the endless German landscape. You lean slowly back in your seat. Your shoulders relax. The train carries you further, always further toward Nuremberg, and the stubble fields surrender themselves, one by one, disappearing behind you. It's a farewell, but not a sorrowful kind. It's the natural course of things. The train travels, the fields remain, and you find yourself in this moment between them, in this blissful, suspended state of watching. You begin to notice how your breath slows. The warmth of the carriage, the monotonous vibration of the journey, the gentle light, all of it draws you into a kind of twilight. Your eyes grow heavy. The stubble fields begin to blur into one another. The hay bales become vague golden points. The rhythm of the train seems to slow down, or at least your perception of it does. The shadows of the stubbles blur, become longer, more hazy. The boundaries between fields become unclear. There's only one great, harmonious golden brown left, interrupted by regular patches. The hay bales, perhaps, or perhaps only shadows. Perhaps only images your own mind has created. The fields rest now, and you rest with them. Your head tilts against the warm window, and the last thing you see is the golden brown of the harvested earth, still so warm and comforting in the autumn light, as the train gently carries you into sleep. She sits in the compartment, and her hands are dry, with brown spots that come from decades in the sun. 84 years old, perhaps 85, with eyes that are still very blue, very attentive, very alive. She wears a dark skirt, a blouse with tiny flowers on it, and a cardigan, even though it's warm outside. She sits with a straight spine, like someone used to sitting upright. The route from Göttingen to Kassel isn't particularly long, perhaps 2 hours, but for this old postwoman, it's a journey through time. She's retired from the post, from a rural route, from a life made up of bicycle rides and letters. She started in this profession 60 years ago and continued until 3 years ago when her knees could no longer pedal, could no longer go up and down the paths to all the houses. She's traveling now to her daughter in Kassel, whom she sees once a month. The first time since retirement that she's made this journey alone. She tells you that being a postwoman wasn't a job. It was a calling. You grow up in a small village, and there are certain roles women play. The innkeeper, the baker, the nurse. The postwoman was one of those roles too. When she was 16 years old, the postmaster asked if she'd be interested. She wasn't particularly, but her parents were poor and the salary was stable. She said yes. And then, she says, something happened that she didn't expect. She fell in love with the work. She fell in love with the villages. She fell in love with the people. The light on this summer day comes through the window in stripes, and she leans her head against the glass. Her face grows warm. You see the lines in her face, not wrinkles, but geography, a map of a life much lived. She tells you that when she started as a postwoman, she had a bicycle, a simple green bicycle with a large basket in front. The basket was for the letters, but the basket was used for other things too. When Mrs. Schmidt had a baby, the postwoman brought nappies. When the farmer received a prize, the postwoman brought the newspaper before it reached anywhere else in the village. She wasn't just a postwoman. She was the voice of the outside world in a village that otherwise saw little of it. She tells the stories as though rolling a film. Each house on the route, each person she saw for decades. Old Mr. Klein, who always had tea ready when she arrived, sitting in a chair on his veranda looking far into the distance, hoping for a letter from a daughter who'd left him. The widow Rosemarie, who always gave the postwoman a piece of homemade cake, warm cake still from the oven, and who asked how the postwoman's day had been. The Hoffman family, who only received letters from a son in America, and the postwoman was their only contact with him, the only sign he was still alive, that he still remembered, that he still existed. She was a witness to their lives. She was part of their days. She was necessary. And not just necessary, she was loved. The postwoman was the first person the villages saw when life had news, good or bad. She was the bringer of joy and sorrow. She was the heartbeat, beating every day, keeping these places alive. The train passes small villages, the same sort of villages where she did her work. She looks out and points one out to you, somewhere beside the tracks. She says there were once 170 people in her village. Now there are perhaps 80. All the young people went away. Only the old remained, and they're dying one by one. The postal route is no longer what it was. There aren't enough people to justify a whole job. That's why she had to retire, though she was only 60. She wanted to keep working, but the world moved on and she was left behind. She takes a box from her bag. It's very old, cardboard, yellowed with age and use. The paper is almost transparent at the corners. She opens it carefully, as though opening something sacred. They're photographs, black and white, faded, but not with the quality of modern black and white. This is the faded color of true age, of real time past. You see the young postwoman on her green bicycle, smiling, perhaps 16 years old, or 20, with a short skirt and a white shirt, her hair long and dark. You see her growing older in subsequent photos, 22, 30, 40. Her hair grayer, the bicycle aging, rusty at the corners, but still the same bicycle. Still that same green bicycle, cared for and loved. The smile never really changes. It grows a bit more tired, a bit wiser, but it stays a smile. You see hundreds of days compressed into these photographs. Little moments. In every house, someone smiling, someone waving, someone seeing the postwoman. She tells you that the bicycle rides were what kept her alive. The rhythm, up and down, village after village, letter after letter. It was like a prayer repeated every day. The compartment smells a bit of her, a subtle scent of old skin, of the soap she uses, of years on a bicycle under the sun. It's not unpleasant. It's even comforting, this smell of work and dedication. You ask her if she misses the bicycle rides. very much, she says. Her voice becomes very quiet. I miss it more than I have words to describe. Now I sit in my house and look out the window and see the bicycles of young people passing by, always faster, always with headphones, never looking, never seeing who lives in the houses, whether anyone needs help, whether anyone needs connection. They just ride. They never collect. They never connect. They don't understand that riding isn't the goal, that riding is where real life happens. The post office is gone. The job is over. But the silence remains. Silence is all I have now. And sometimes, she says, in that silence, I still hear the wheels of my bicycle on the paths, still hear people greeting me, still hear my own laughter, young and unafraid. The light grows softer, more golden. The day's heat becomes less intense. She closes her eyes, and you notice she's mentally on that bicycle route, on the old green bicycle, with the basket full of letters, with the sun on her skin, with years still ahead of her. There's a smile on her face, very slight, very content. This is perhaps happiness, to remember what you loved and to know that you did it with your whole heart. The compartment becomes quieter, gentler, as though dusk itself were a kind of music. Other passengers have gotten off, left their seats, taken their luggage. Only you and the old postwoman remain. Two people who've just met, but who've shared a story. She carefully packs her photographs back in the old box. Each photo is treated like a child being put to bed. She opens her eyes and looks directly at you. And there's strength in that look, a clarity that comes from decades of work. She says that movement, real movement with a purpose, isn't valued enough. That people are everywhere now, faster than ever before, but they see nothing. They're not present. They're not really there. They're just gone, in their heads, in their goals. She wants young people to know there's more, that life isn't just about getting from here to there, that it's worth riding slowly, that it's worth seeing, that it's worth being stopped, not from outside, but from within, and knowing that this is the moment, that now is the moment. As the train carries you to Castle, and an old woman holds her memories like a treasure, you realize that true life isn't in the destinations. True life is on the route, with a bicycle and a basket full of letters, with a greeting to every house, with the understanding that it matters to be there, to arrive, to see and be seen. He sits by the window, and beside him on the seat are watercolors, not finished paintings, but sketches, studies, small experiments with color and light. He's perhaps mid-50s, with hands that tremble slightly, but not from fear, from excitement, from an inner music only he can hear. He wears a simple pair of glasses, plastic, worn, and a perfectly ordinary grey shirt, as though he doesn't want the world to notice him too much. The route from Hanover to Hildesheim is one that must mean 100 journeys for this man. He's a railway artist, not professionally, but from a kind of inner necessity. In his free hours, when he's not working, and what he works at he doesn't say, he paints the railway stations in watercolor. Each station a study, each station a kind of prayer. The route to Hildesheim is short, half an hour, but in that half hour you can see a great deal if you know how to look. He shows you his sketchbook. It's old, the paper yellowed, the binding coming loose. The pages are covered with drawings, not realistic depictions, but something like a step before that. Shadows, lines, hints of architecture. You see Hanover Central Station, but not as it looks, as it feels. The great windows aren't windows, they're dreams made of glass. The pillars aren't pillars, they're the ribs of some great, breathing creature. The station is still, but somehow it lives too. He tells you he doesn't know when it began, perhaps 10 years ago. He was on his way to work. He doesn't say what his work is, and you don't ask. And he saw a railway station. It was Göttingen, or perhaps Bad Pyrmont. He's not sure, because all the stations blur together in his memory now. But on that day, the light was particular. The way it fell on the bricks, horizontal and long, as though the sun were trying to penetrate the walls. The way time seems to flow differently in a station hall. Slower, denser, more meaningful, as though the station itself had a heartbeat. He simply stood there on the platform and wept. He doesn't know why. Perhaps because he understood that his life up to that point had been wasted, that he'd almost missed something important. He bought a watercolor set that day, at the next shop he saw. He hadn't painted since he was 9 years old, in an art class where the teacher said he had no talent. He didn't know how to paint, but he didn't need to know. His body knew. His hands knew. The first station was terrible. The colors ran together, the proportions were wrong, the perspective impossible. But it was also marvelous. It was what he needed. It was like a voice opening in his head, a voice saying, "This is your life. This is what you're here for." The landscape slides past, meadows, fields, small patches of woodland, other trains heading in the opposite direction, then meadows again. The railway artist doesn't really look out. His eyes are closed. He's not sleeping. He's working. You notice he's drawing Hildesheim Station in his head before he sees it. The architecture he knows, not from photographs or books, but from repeated looking, from a lifetime of waiting, of arriving, of watching how other people come and go and change their lives. The smell in the compartment is subtle. His watercolor case smells of damp paper and old color pigments, a mixture you don't smell anywhere else. It's comforting somehow. It smells of dedication. You ask him why only railway stations? Why not churches or castles or other places with architecture? He opens his eyes and looks at you as though wondering how you don't understand. Railway stations, he says, are places where people begin and end, where life changes direction, where everything is possible and nothing is guaranteed. A church is about eternity. A castle is about the past. But a railway station is about now, about this moment, this second, when you decide where you're going. The stations mark the transitions. He takes a finished watercolor from his bag. The paper is very fine, handmade, and the colors are very subtle. It's Hildesheim Station, the painting he'll make today. But it's not a work of art. It's a kind of poem without words. The building's facade isn't in purple or orange or any fantastical tone. It's in grey and beige and a tiny touch of rose where the morning light lies on the stones. The windows aren't empty. They're filled with a blue that looks like hope. The doors are open, or perhaps closed. You can't know for certain. You ask him if he ever shows these paintings, if he exhibits or sells them. He shakes his head, and his eyes are a bit sad, a bit content. No, he says. They're only for me. If I show them, the magic goes away. They're not art. They're a way of praying, a way of speaking to the stations, telling them that I see them, that I understand them, that the people who pass through every day, they carry the stations with them in their hearts. And I paint to tell them that that matters, that it counts. The train slows. You're approaching Hildesheim. The railway artist closes his eyes again, and this time you see he's actually painting. His hand moves subtly, gently, as though he's working with an invisible brush on invisible paper. His lips move a bit too, and you wonder if he's praying. Perhaps he is praying. Perhaps that's the same as drawing. The compartment has filled and emptied itself during this half hour. People have gotten on and off, hurried, stressed, staring at their phones or out the windows, searching for something they can't name. But the railway artist seems not to notice. He's elsewhere. He's in all the stations at once, in Hanover and Göttingen and Bad Pyrmont, and in the station he knew in childhood, before the trains got faster and the stations grew lonely. He has a small notebook in his trouser pocket, and sometimes when the train shifts, he writes something down. A word, a color, a mood. Grey-blue. Windows like dreams. Light against stone. These aren't notes for a painting. They're prayers. Little anchors to hold the moments that would otherwise be forgotten. You see that his life isn't normal, that he doesn't function normally, doesn't work like others, doesn't marry, doesn't do the things people do. Instead, he paints. He paints every day, he says. Even when he's not using watercolors, he sketches. On paper napkins in cafes, on the margins of newspapers, in the sand at the beach, on the back of old bills. The stations are everywhere in his head, a constant presence, a constant question. They're his obsession, but it's a beautiful obsession, the kind of obsession that saves people. It's, he says, what keeps me alive, what gives me meaning. His voice is very quiet when he says this, and you notice it's not dramatic, but completely truthful. That if he stopped drawing, he'd probably stop eating, sleeping, breathing. The stations aren't his hobby. They're his reason. The light grows softer. The day's heat loosens its grip. The sky is still bright, but the gold begins turning to silver. The railway artist opens his eyes and looks out the window. Hildesheim approaches. You see how he concentrates, how he really sees the station building for the first time that day. His eyes aren't those of an artist looking for flaws. They're those of someone feeling reverence. Hildesheim's architecture is old, romantic, a bit run down, but also dignified, as though it knows it was beautiful and still holds beautiful memories. You ask him how long he'll keep drawing. Until he dies, perhaps? He nods very slowly. Yes, until I die. And then, I hope someone sees the stations and knows they were loved, that there was someone who understood all along that they mattered, That's all I want from my life. Simply that the stations knew I was looking at them. As the train carries you to Hildesheim, and a quiet man opens his watercolor set and begins to paint, you understand that art doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes the most important art is the kind only a few people see, but it changes the world for those who understand it. She sits by the window, and her hands rest in her lap like two white birds that have just landed. 77 years old, perhaps 78, with a face that has taken on the shape of decades. Not hard, but soft, like bread that's been left too long. She wears a dark blue coat, even though it's summer, and a brown leather bag so old it's nearly shimmering. The route from Ulm to Friedrichshafen is long enough for thoughts to gather. The baker's widow is on her way to visit her sister in the neighboring village. The first time in 2 years, since the pandemic changed everything, since her husband died. Her sister doesn't know that this is the first time in 2 years. From her perspective, time is simple. Another year, another year. But for this widow, each year is a mine of minutes and memories, and most of them lead into the darkest tunnels. She tells you, without you asking, that her husband got up at 4 o'clock every morning. Every morning, since they were married. That's nearly 60 years. A scene you can picture like a film shown 1,000 times. The darkness beyond the windows, the house quiet, her husband rising from bed without waking her, dressing as though preparing for a sacred ceremony. Because for him, it was sacred. Making bread was his life. It wasn't just his work, it was his religion. The landscape rolls past. Meadows, small villages, church spires reaching toward the sky like fingers trying to grasp something just beyond reach. She gazes out, and you notice she knows all these places. Not by name, but in her soul. She's traveled this route 1,000 times. When? Before, when her husband was still alive. She blinks, and for a moment, you see an older life shimmer through the present one, the life she lived before grief became a permanent housemate. Her gaze is very familiar with these windows, this rhythm of train travel, the dull clack of wheels on the rails, a beat she'd stopped counting in her sleep long before her husband died. She takes a piece of bread from her bag. It's wrapped in paper, and the paper is brittle with age and use. Not modern paper, but something older. Butcher's paper in brown. The sort you might remember from the 1960s. The bread itself is hard. It must be 2, perhaps 3 days old. She breaks off a tiny piece and puts it in her mouth. She chews very slowly, very carefully, as though taking an examination. Her jaws that have almost no teeth left, but move with mindfulness. You ask her if the bread is from her husband. She nods and her eyes grow wet, but the tears don't fall. They're too old for that. The tears stopped falling long ago. Now they simply sit behind her eyes and look out, trapped like little insects in amber. She tells you that she has bread at home, a whole loaf. She can't eat it. She can't throw it away. It sits in a bread box in her kitchen. And sometimes, when she can't sleep, and she never can sleep, she goes downstairs and looks at it. She sees the scratches on the surface, the way the dough split itself as it rose in the oven. These are signatures. This is her husband's handwriting, written in bread that's no longer fresh, that's no longer fragrant. The compartment is warm, and the window is slightly open, and you smell something like hay, but also like bread. Summer itself carries the scent of bread. The widow closes her eyes, and her lips are slightly parted, as though trying to breathe in that smell. She spent an entire night after her husband died sitting in the bakery, trying to bake bread. She'd had no training. She knew nothing of fermentation or hydration or the science of gluten. She only knew that her husband touched this dough every morning and turned it into something divine. Wet, alive, breathing. She tried to do the same. Her dough was too cold, or too warm, or too something. She failed. The bread was hard and dense and unhappy. She struck it again and again on the table, this dough, as though it were the person she was most angry at. Then she wept on the floor beside the oven, the heat of the failed loaves on her face, and she understood that it wasn't enough to love your husband. You had to know how to live like him. You had to have his hands. She tells you that she'll never bake bread again. She can't. It's too close. It's too much like trying to copy him, as though he were replaceable. Baking bread was what defined him. If she can't do it the way he did, then she can't do it at all. That's how she thinks. You notice it's not fair to judge herself so harshly, but it's also not ununderstandable. When you love someone for that long, so long, everything becomes a memory of them. The train's speed changes. You're approaching a city. The tracks become more complex. Other trains push alongside you, and the window views become fragmentary. She opens her eyes and looks around, as though just remembering where she is. The compartment is full of people, but she was alone, in her head, in her memory. That's all right. It's even better that way. You can't share grief with other people. That's something you have to do alone, even when you're surrounded by many. The widow takes the paper around the bread and folds it very carefully. Each fold is deliberate, thoughtful. The way you fold something that's precious. The paper becomes a tiny square, which she places back in her bag. She tells you that her sister doesn't know how sad she is. Her sister thinks 2 years is enough, that she should feel better, that she should find another man, or take up a new hobby, or simply move on. But how do you move on when the most important part of your life is waiting? Waiting for 4 o'clock in the morning, when you'd hear him getting up. How do you move on when time itself is broken, when seconds feel like seasons? You might tell her that grief is a long time, that 2 years is nothing when you've known someone for 60 years, that her sister, who isn't grieving, can't understand this. But you say nothing, because it's too early, and words aren't enough anyway. You simply sit beside her and look out the window at the same meadows, the same villages that her husband saw 1,000 times. And for a moment, you're both here, and her husband is also here, in memory, in bread, in the way the light falls on the fields. Dusk falls on the compartment. It becomes golden, then orange gold. Then the color becomes too warm, too soft to have a name. The widow rests her head against the window, and her face is reflected there. The old face and the young face simultaneously, overlaid. She'll fall asleep soon. You notice it, because her breathing becomes regular, peaceful. Her head nods forward, and then, as though correcting herself, leans again against the glass. In sleep, she looks less sad. In sleep, she looks as though she's waiting, just waiting, on the platform of her life, for the next train, for the next arrival, for the person she loves most. Between and Friedrichshafen, while the evening sun transforms the landscape into amber, the train carries an old widow to her sister, and with her, it carries a piece of bread that cannot be eaten, a memory of 4 o'clock in the morning, of a life that was lived, of love that doesn't stop just because time does. You sit across from her, and she's holding a small potted plant with the widest eyes. She's perhaps 28, perhaps 29. With dark hair she's bound up in a practical knot, though a few strands have escaped and now flutter around her face. She's looking out the window as though she can see every single flower the train passes. The plant on her lap is a small ivy, and she touches the leaves so gently, as though stroking a child's head. These are the hands of a scientist, but also the hands of someone who loved long before she knew how to be a botanist. The botanical garden in Freiburg is waiting for her. A new position, a first proper job, an entire new world. You ask her how long it's been since she defended her thesis, and she laughs, a real, unfiltered laugh that makes several other passengers smile. Only 3 months have passed since her defense. Only 3 months. She still can't believe it actually happened. The route from Tübingen to Freiburg is short, but in those 2 hours, something magical happens in this young woman's eyes. As the train rolls through meadows, you tell her that Freiburg has one of the loveliest botanical gardens in Germany, that the hills there are round and green, that in summer wild strawberries grow in the cracks of stone steps, that there are corners the gardener has forgotten because they're too beautiful to cultivate. She nods, and you see how she's already mapping the gardens in her head, imagining where the beds might go, where the shadows fall, which plants would be happy there. That's the sort of love botanists have, not for the place itself, but for its possibility. Her eyes look out through the windows and see something that isn't there, but could be. That's a kind of magic only young people have, those who haven't yet learned that some dreams don't come true. She opens her rucksack and pulls out a thick, worn notebook covered in scientific names, sketches of leaf structures, little notes in the margins. She looks at it as though reading an old letter. This notebook, she says, was in her hand when she first saw a flower cross-section in biology class. She was 11 years old. The sepal arrangement was so perfect, so mathematical, that she thought there must be some error function in nature, that this couldn't possibly be random. It must be meant. And now, more than 20 years later, she's on her way to this garden to understand nature in a new way. The light outside is golden. It's late afternoon, and summer holds the world in a warm, liquid hand. The meadows flee. Dandelions, daisies, little flowers you can't name, but which she immediately categorizes. She shows you, as you look, how the wildflowers are arranged in patterns, how nature itself is a gardener, only with different rules. less order, more dream. The botanist in her sees both worlds, the scientific and the aesthetic, and she can't choose which is more beautiful. You ask her what it feels like to step into real life for the first time. Not university, not study, but actual work, responsibility. Her eyes grow wide, and she tells you she can't sleep at night. She turns this way and that, thinking of mistakes she could make, plants that might die under her care, thousands of things she should have prepared, but hasn't. Her hands tremble a bit when she says this, and you recognize that this is more real than anything she's said before. But at the same time, she says, and here her voice becomes very quiet, very tender, at the same time, it's the best feeling I've ever had. I can finally begin. Finally, not just learn from plants, but care for them, be responsible for them. That's a huge difference. The other passengers in the compartment have slowly become a kind of family. An older woman with a dog smiles at her. An older man reading a newspaper lowers it and looks at her as though remembering what it was like to be young and full of hope. The botanist doesn't consciously notice, but she soaks up this warmth like a plant drinks in light. You watch as she blooms. Yes, that's really the word, literally under the gentle attention of these strangers. She shows you a photo on her phone. It's the botanical garden in Freiburg, and the botanist has looked at it from at least 30 different angles. There's a large pond, and water lilies are visible, their leaves spread out like little green platforms. She tells you that water lilies have a remarkable inner structure, air chambers that allow them to float on the surface, an engineering marvel in a single leaf. It's not possible for her to simply love it. She has to understand it. Understanding is her love. She doesn't see the world the way other people do. She sees it as a puzzle to be solved, but also as a poem to be read, both at once. That makes her a good botanist, but it also makes her restless, always searching for the next question, the next answer. The dusk falls gently. The golden glow becomes amber, then copper. The train loses speed, and you know Freiburg is near. The botanist grows quieter. Her hands, which have been moving throughout the journey, telling the story of leaf structures and root systems, become still. She places them on her potted ivy, the small plant she's taking to her new garden. It's a piece of her old life, an anchor, something that reminds her who she was before she begins to become who she wants to be. You ask her how this small ivy will feel, being planted in that new garden. She thinks, her head tilted slightly, her eyes half closed. The ivy will be overwhelmed, she says. Everything will be completely new. It won't know how things work. But it will grow. She'll help it grow. They both will. And when it does grow, it will be stronger than it ever would have been if it hadn't gone through this change. The light from the window becomes subtler. The heat of the day retreats, and the first cool air of evening creeps in. The train passes through smaller villages, and you see houses with gardens, some neglected, some wild, some carefully arranged. The botanist sees them all, categorizes the plants, thinks about their needs. Her brain is always working. It can't switch off. That's a blessing, and a curse. She tells you she's afraid she won't be good enough, that all the plants might die from her lack of knowledge, that starting from day one, she'll make a long string of mistakes. And you don't want to say this because you know she's right. She will. She will make mistakes. Everyone does. But you see in her eyes that that's not the problem. The problem is that she wants so much for it to be right that the possibility of failure overwhelms her. The botanist is already loving before she's even begun. That's too much love. That's love running too deep. And as you watch her, you realize that's exactly the kind of person who truly grows. The kind who loves so much that they have to act from love, not because it's easy, but because it's impossible not to. As the train gently carries you toward Freiburg, you imagine this young woman walking through that botanical garden, her hands in the earth, learning new plants, discovering new parts of herself. The ivy will grow. She will grow. And in years to come, they'll forget they were ever tense or afraid. They'll only know that the beginning was beautiful and that they were ready. I closed my eyes. Just for a moment, I thought. Just for a moment. But then came the images behind my lids. No clear images, just colors, soft colors, blue and gray, and a bit of gold from the lamp in the compartment. And these colors blended into something that was no longer quite seeing and not yet dreaming. The train traveled on, ta-dum, ta-dum, and each ta-dum was a little bit farther away, as though the train was no longer quite in the same space as I was, as though I was already halfway somewhere else, halfway in that land where tiredness lives, where everything becomes simple. Imagine yourself sitting in your compartment, and the sun falls through the window in broad stripes. The man across from you, he looks as though he's only just learned what rest is. He still carries his violin in its black case on the luggage rack, even though his concert in Salzburg is finished. You can see it in his hands. His fingers aren't yet loose, not quite ready to fall slack. 60 years old, perhaps 61, with a face shaped by decades of listening. His eyes are small and attentive, but now they're looking out the window, as though surprised the world carries on without music at all. His brow has deep lines, not from worry, but from concentrated listening, from all those years trying to understand the music before he played it. He's told you, not directly, but while you've both been checking your tickets, that it was his last summer concert. His last. The word stayed hanging in the air between Salzburg and Munich like a single held note. The journey is marvelous, isn't it? Through the mountains, and the evening air grows slower and more golden with every kilometer. You ask him how long he's been on the stage, and he answers without hesitation. 34 years. 34 years. That's an entire world. That's a whole language he's learned. You watch as he rests his hands on his thighs. They're well cared for, the nails clean, but the palms are scarred and roughened from the strings. That's the work of perhaps 40 years, perhaps longer. His right hand trembles just the smallest bit, not from weakness, but from something you can't quite name, from energy that has no strings left to play. When he lifts his hand to brush the hair from his forehead, you see how the muscles still know how to make a bow stroke. The body is memory. The conductor comes past, and the violinist nods to him, a generous, benevolent nod. You notice he's spent his life greeting people, directing attention toward others without asking much in return. That's the sort of person you sometimes meet on trains. Those who stopped taking themselves seriously long ago, but not from modesty, rather from a kind of gentle understanding with time. His voice, when he speaks, is quiet and precise, like an instrument just tuned. While you're gazing out the window, you tell him about the heat of the concert, how warm the stage was in Salzburg, and that the air conditioning in the hall wasn't working properly. He laughs. It's not a big laugh, more of a whisper, and says the heat was good for the tone. There are temperatures, he tells you, that make the air so dense the sound shines in it like in a golden frame. It was that way that evening. The halls in Salzburg are old, he says, and old halls have their own ears. You have to learn how to speak to them. That took years. The landscape rolls by. Meadows that are a bit dusty from summer. Grain fields that will soon turn golden brown. Every few minutes we see a tiny station, and you wonder who still gets off at such places. The violinist watches too. His eyes follow each station like a lost friend. There's something in his gaze that tells you he knows these stations, perhaps not by name, but with a kind of inner geography born from all the journeys to all the concerts. He opens his bag and takes out a bottle of water. It's green, plastic, worn and used. He drinks slowly, thoughtfully, as though analyzing the taste. His Adam's apple moves, and again you see that this man has spent his life listening to how the music flows through his body, listening to how silence creeps under the notes. Even in drinking water, there's attentiveness in his movements. The sun sinks lower. The light turns orange, then red, and suddenly everything is warm as honey. The compartment fills with this warm light, and the dust in the air becomes visible, little particles dancing like tiny notes. The violinist closes his eyes for a moment. His hands still rest on his thighs, but now they're looser. The tension hasn't gone, but it's become different somehow, more peaceful. You wonder if he's still hearing music, or if silence is finally allowed to enter his body. You think about what it means to do something for so long, your whole life, not from ambition, but from love. And then one day to sit down and realize that the time of that love is different. Not worth less, but different. The violinist opens his eyes again and looks at you as though he's heard your thoughts. He smiles very slightly, and it's the smile of someone who's finally stopped pretending to be what he isn't. The compartment grows quieter. The other passengers are asleep or lost in their phones, little islands of light in the ever-darkening compartments. The clack of the rails is like a heartbeat, steady and soothing, a rhythm gently drawing you into another time. The window now reflects more than it reveals. You see your own face and the violinist's, overlaid with the darkening hills outside. It's as though you're sitting together in some in-between place, not quite awake, not quite dreaming. The smell of the summer evening drifts through the slightly open window. Warm hay, dust, the green dampness of meadows under a hot sun. And you smell something else too, something connected to the violinist. It's like the scent of rosin, very faint but present, a tiny hint of what a life with music carries with it. He takes his black case down from the luggage rack, carefully, lovingly, with the care you bring to something more precious than life itself. He doesn't open it. He just places his hand on it, as though putting a hand on an old friend's shoulder. His face, when he does this, is full of gratitude that doesn't need to be loud. His eyes are firm now, but not hard. They're full of the feeling that something great is just ending, and that that's good, that all good things must end. You notice he's not sad, not really. It's more as though he's breathing out a very long breath, a breath he's held for a very long time, the whole long breath of his life. As you watch him, you wonder what it brings to love something so much that it shapes your body. His shoulders lean a bit forward. That's decades of violin posture. His ears lean forward. That's decades of listening. Even the way he breathes is something the violin taught him. A man completely permeated by his music. You wonder if that's sorrow or happiness. You conclude that perhaps it's both, and that the best of life is always both. Dusk settles into the compartment like a blanket. Outside, the first stars twinkle, and the sky isn't quite black yet, but a deep indigo where the last warm colors still shimmer. The violinist leans his head against the window pane, and you feel he's no longer completely awake. His breathing is deeper, more even. The violin in his lap, or rather his arm around it, is like the last part of an embrace not yet finished. Somewhere between the rolling hills and Munich, while the night drinks the last gold from the sky, this old musician sleeps, his hand still resting on the violin, as though he couldn't let it go, even in sleep. In this stillness between Salzburg and Munich, while the mountains carry you and the night wraps around you, the violinist reminds you that life consists not just of what we do, but of the love with which we do it, and that letting go is sometimes the most beautiful concert we play. You know, on the line from Brig to Domodossola, on one of those long winter nights, I climbed into my compartment alone, and scarcely had the door closed behind me before I caught a scent, this very particular smell. You might know it too. Tobacco smoke. But not just any tobacco, but pipe tobacco, with that warm, spicy hint of, well, of something not quite nameable. The seat across from me was empty. The windows were fogged with cold from outside, and moisture still condensed on the heating, but that smell, it hung in the air as though someone had only just risen and left. It was the most extraordinary thing that I couldn't see them, but could smell them. And somehow that made the absence almost more present than if someone had actually been sitting there. I sat down in my seat and tried to see through the window more clearly, but the snow outside was so thick that only a soft white was visible. No mountains, no houses, just that diffuse, gentle white. And in that moment, a memory came to me, not like a flood, but more like warmth spreading slowly from inside outward until it filled everything. It was the tobacco, you see, exactly that mixture. I remembered someone, and I won't say who, it doesn't matter, someone who always smoked that tobacco on train journeys, and how a little wave of smoke would move through the air while the train traveled through the landscape. This person, they never spoke much. They just sat there, smoking. And I sat too, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching. And between us was this silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence that's empty. It was a full silence, you understand. The train began to roll, slowly at first, then faster, and I remained seated, still that scent in the air, barely noticeable now, but really there. I closed my eyes. In my thoughts, I saw the windows of another train, years and years before, perhaps 2 decades or more, and how the light of the setting sun played on the smoke that slowly dissolved to nothing. Threads of smoke disappearing into the air, like everything disappears. I wondered who might have been in my compartment. Perhaps an old gentleman who'd changed his route. Perhaps just someone who lives somewhere along this line and takes a journey now and then when the feeling comes to see the mountains, or simply to escape themselves for a while. It didn't matter. The scent was there, and it was enough, more than enough, to say everything that needed saying. My fingers slid over the armrest, that rough fabric that had grown smooth beneath many hands, and I thought of all the hands that had rested here, all the people who'd sat in that seat before me. Some would have been happy, some sad, some simply tired. All the people who'd come after me would also leave their traces, but only this one smell, this pipe tobacco, was with me. The window fogged again, and I didn't wipe it clear. The snow outside was worth the blur, mysterious and indistinct. And inside the compartment it was warm, and this tobacco. I leaned my head against the window and let my eyes slowly close. The train rocked in its steady rhythm, and that smell, that marvelous, familiar smell, it spread like a fine net over everything I saw and thought and felt. Someone once sat here smoking a pipe on a cold winter night like this. Perhaps in another year, or perhaps it wasn't so long ago. It didn't matter. Here, in this compartment, with that scent, I wasn't alone, even though the seat was empty. The smell was the presence of another, not bodily but real, and that was enough. I thought about how little it took to waken a memory. Not a photograph, not a letter, not an object you could touch, but only a scent. Only those invisible particles floating through the air and touching my brain, and suddenly there was a whole story, a whole life, a whole presence I thought I knew. And the warmth of memory that came to me through the tobacco scent filled everything. And I sank down into a sleep that was gentle and distant. And in my dreams, there were trains that traveled forever, and windows that never fogged. Picture the train running from Aschaffenburg to Gemünden through the Spessart, and you're gazing out at snow-laden trees, at colourful bird feeders hanging on houses, wherever people live in villages and homes scattered about. Out there, at those feeding stations, in this cold and silent winter landscape, a woman documents the bird life, counting and observing with meticulous care, keeping records of the birds that stay through winter, the species, the numbers, the life that unfolds beneath the snow. Her name is Beata, and she's 62 years old, with short brown hair that curls a bit, and eyes that are always attentive, always searching, always grateful for what they see. For 15 years now, She's been counting the birds in the spessart during winter, noting down with systematic care which species arrive, how many there are, how long they stay, whether they return each year. This is citizen science. Science by ordinary people who give their time for knowledge, for love of nature, for understanding the world, for the future. Beata was once a primary school teacher, taught children once upon a time. But now she teaches only the birds, teaches through observation, through patience. Winter was her season, her best season, her most precious season, when nature became transparent, when the leaves were gone and the birds showed themselves clearly. The birds needed food in those harsh times, help from people, and the feeding stations drew them like magnets, like burning lights in the darkness of the cold season. Beta had more than 30 feeding stations to monitor, scattered across villages and gardens throughout the spessart, some places 2 kilometers apart, others even farther. Every day she'd go from one feeding station to the next, her route on foot or by bicycle, noting carefully in her notebook, in her own handwriting, which birds she saw, how many of each species, where they were, what they were eating, how they behaved. This wasn't sport or game, no, not at all. It was pure, genuine love. Beta loved the birds, loved this wilderness, loved this nature that was so fragile, so threatened, so vital. She wanted to understand how they were doing, whether the populations were healthy or whether they were declining, shrinking under pressure from pesticides and climate change and urban sprawl. She shared her data with other citizen scientists throughout Germany, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, all with the same interests, the same love. And these data were used by universities to understand the bird world, to spot trends, to see whether certain species were vanishing or holding their numbers, to measure the health of ecosystems. This work mattered, perhaps not to the world of power and money, but it mattered for truth, for knowledge, for understanding, for the future of our world and the animals within it. One morning in December was particularly cold and clear and beautiful. The thermometer read -15 degrees, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe it in, your breath turning to ice crystals. The snow lay meters deep, covering the world in white and silence. Another realm, another world entirely. The birds were hungry and thin, their feathers puffed up against the cold like little fluffy balls, like pom-poms. Beta left her warm house early, at 7 in the morning, while the sun hadn't yet risen, and visited all her feeding stations in systematic order, following her usual route, a route she'd known for 15 years, like the palm of her own hand, like the layout of her own home. She filled the bags with feed, sunflower seeds and millet, and special black oil birdseed from the shop, the sort the birds loved most. She cleaned the water vessels, where some birds needed water even in winter, and she broke the ice when it froze, with her hands, with patience. She counted carefully and methodically: blackbirds, tits, sparrows, robins, wrens, thrushes, and she wrote the numbers down in her book with a pencil, the exact count. The species were numerous that winter, diverse and varied, a whole ecosystem of small creatures. In a good winter, you could count 30 different species if you were lucky, if you were truly attentive. Beta was lucky, always, all the time. Or perhaps it wasn't luck, but attentiveness, love, patience, a patience not everyone possessed. She saw what others overlooked, what others wouldn't notice, wouldn't even look for. A sparrowhawk hidden between the trees. A raptor, a hunter, dangerous. A greenfinch, the first of winter, shimmering green, rare to see. A marsh tit, uncommon here, a surprise, a gift. She wrote it all down in her notebook with a pencil, in careful, precise notes, recording not just the species and numbers, but the birds' behavior too, whether they were aggressive or calm, fearful or bold, along with the weather conditions, the snowfall, the temperature, whether the seeds from yesterday had been eaten or not. The scientists at the university, collecting and analyzing her data, called Bite and her 1,000 other bird counters citizen scientists. That was an honorable name, a proud name. But the truth was, this was important work, even though it went unnoticed, even though nobody was paid for it, even though no fame or attention followed. Bite received no pension for this work, no salary, only the satisfaction and inner joy of knowing she contributed a small but real part to understanding the world, to knowledge of nature, to protecting the future. That was enough for her, more than enough, everything she needed. She wasn't lonely because she was part of a community, a silent community of observers, of nature lovers, counting and noting all across Germany, doing their work. Every night when Bite went to bed, she was grateful. Grateful for the birds, for the chance to be outdoors, for work that mattered. She slept well, with a clear conscience, knowing she was doing something good. By midday, after at least 10 hours out in the cold, Beate returned to her warm house. She was exhausted but satisfied, with a good feeling in her heart. She made herself a hot cup of tea, fetched a blanket, and sat at the table transcribing her handwritten notes carefully into her computer, into a database, part of a vast scientific project the university coordinated. She sent the data online, together with 1,000 other volunteer bird counters, like Beate and Marcus and Rüdiger and Maria and hundreds of others, each with their own feeding stations, their own observations, their own love of nature. The data were collected carefully and methodically from thousands of Beates, analyzed by university scientists with computers, compared with years gone by, year on year, decade by decade. And at the end of winter, there would be a comprehensive analysis, an overview that would show how the birds of Germany were faring, whether the populations were stable or whether they were declining, whether the love of nature, shown by people like Beate, actually saved the animals, saved at least a little, gave them at least a chance. And now, as the train travels from Aschaffenburg to Gmunden and the snow drifts past the windows like dreams, imagine Beate out in the cold, counting her birds, writing down the data with shaking fingers, but with great precision, wanting to understand the world through this small, vital work. She's one of 1,000 citizen scientists in Germany, giving freely their time, their love, their attention, their patience. They ask nothing in return for fame or payment. They do it from sheer love of nature, of truth, of understanding. Sleep now with the knowledge that there are people who want to understand the world better, people who love, who give, who count and note, so the future might be better. The train ran through a tunnel, and for a brief moment it was completely dark outside. Just the rushing sound, just the echo of wheels on tunnel walls. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And then we were out again, and the night wrapped itself around us once more, like a mother gathering her child back into her arms after a short outing. I thought how beautiful that is. Tunnel and night, and tunnel again, and night again. On and on, on and on. And after a while, you stop knowing what's outside and what's inside, because everything flows into everything, because it all becomes one, because sleep is so near, you can almost smell it. The train rolled gently onward, and outside now the world was completely dark. Just a few lights in the distance, solitary windows where other people too were settling toward rest. I thought about how many people in the world at this moment were falling asleep, each in their own bed, in their own compartment, in their own room, and how we were all part of one great, quiet movement, a movement into sleep. The rhythm of the wheels on the rails, ta-dum, 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 was like the breathing of some great, friendly creature carrying us all together through the darkness, through time.